Alright, third installment of how to make a no-budget short film from start to finish. Today, pre-production from a director's perspective. Solid pre-production is vital to ensuring you get the results you want. You need to make sure your cast and crew are well informed and in alignment with the vision for your project. This means preparing documents, scheduling meetings and rehearsals, and keeping an open line of communication with your collaborators.
Sounds like there's a lot of interest.
All right.
Importantly, every bit of work and thought you put into the shoot and pre-production is a fucking brain cramp you're saving yourself from on the shoot day. Surprises are unavoidable, but it's important to me to keep the unexpected to a minimum to make sure the shoot runs like a well-oiled machine.
Everything's running smoothly.
This is only achievable by ensuring you focus on extensive pre-production. So in this episode, we're going to go through casting and rehearsals, location scouting, and pre-vis for the short film I've been working on. For casting, I used a range of approaches to find actors. I prepared a casting call that summarizes the concept for the film, includes some production details like potential shoot dates, the roles, and then contact details. For the roles, I also like to include just a little bit about the character. Some casting calls just give a very basic description like the age, gender, and name of the role, which isn't really much to go on. The main thing I requested from the actors was a show reel. This is really all that counts as far as I'm concerned when assessing the actors prior to an audition.
What matters is this.
Regardless of the kind of scene they play, it's relatively easy to tell what level they're at and if they'll fit. If their previous work doesn't include a scene that's similar to the one I'm casting for, I might also request a self-tape. That usually makes the decision much clearer. The casting call was a Google Doc, so I was able to update and change it in real time. This meant that I was able to update the production details, but I was also able to add a note if a role had been filled. That way people wouldn't send in unnecessary applications.
We're not fucking around here, right guys?
By the way, it might be worth using a separate email address for this, like casting@whatever your domain is, because my inbox was absolutely flooded when I sent this out. Just something to keep in mind. I distributed the casting call by posting an ad on Crew United, which is like an online film jobs board amongst other things. I think this platform is more popular in Germany, but by now I think most countries have some form of cast and crew hiring platform. I also sent the casting call to acting agencies, which if you don't have a budget is a real shot in the dark.
They said market price.
But there's some really kind people who are generous with their time out there. Sometimes you forget that.
This world's fucking so fucked up.
Finally, I also looked for specific actors myself, so I looked through acting agency websites and also checked filmmakers.eu, which is a directory of actors based in Europe. Again, there's probably something similar wherever the fuck you're based. Just Google it.
Don't everybody believe in Google? Go Google that shit.
But in this case, I sent the actors the casting call directly through whatever contact details were listed. I spent the next while going through applications and watching a lot of show reels. There were certain roles that people jumped at and others that were a bit harder to fill. It was a lot of work because I had to fill 13, full speaking scene roles.
I brought you a little sympathy card.
If possible, I'd highly recommend working with a casting director that could make this process significantly easier. But once I started confirming some of the cast, I started scheduling rehearsals. For my process, I consider rehearsals essential, especially if I haven't worked with the actors before. I also like to schedule them well before the shoot so that I can reflect on what worked and what can be improved. This is also like a trial run of what you'll be working through on set. You'll notice the strengths and weaknesses of the scenes and the actors so that you can already get a sense of how you might direct them on set. You can see who's open and collaborative and who's a bit more rigid and difficult.
If that's a veiled criticism about me, I won't hear it and I won't respond to it.
It's an invaluable part of the process. For this project, like I said, we had a relatively large cast from various cities, so I scheduled the rehearsals as video calls. Are video calls ideal for auditions?
Fuck no, baby.
But it was important to me to speak to the actors and to have them at least see one another once beforehand. My priority was to ensure that they understand the core of the scene and to get a feel for how they would play it. I followed the same structure for each rehearsal, so first we introduce ourselves, then I would immediately ask them to play the scene. My hope here is to hear their interpretation of the scene without me influencing any of it.
Show me what you got.
Sometimes you get some interesting interpretations that you might otherwise not have considered. Then I would talk a bit about the scene, what I consider to be the core of the scene, and how I imagined it.
Actually, what I had in mind was...
I also asked them if they have any questions about the scene or if anything was unclear for them. Then I would let them play the scene again. At this point, I usually haven't given any direction yet. After the second performance, I would start to give direction.
Okay, but the ending needs a little bit of work.
Then we would basically go through the scene a few times and discuss it in between. And once the scene feels like it's almost perfect, I would stop.
Save it for the cameras.
Just so that we don't overdo the scene and there's still some room for adjustments on the shoot day. Now let's talk locations. Locations can make a huge difference in shaping the world of your film, and let's be honest, the production value.
We are on a very tight budget.
Particularly when working on a tight budget, it's best to consider the best options you have access to and to try and pull in some favors. In my case, I knew I had access to certain locations from as far back as when I was writing the script, but there were certain locations that I had no idea whether I could secure. The best approach in this case is to try and find locations that are versatile. Basically, try to find locations that you could set multiple scenes in. For example, a rehearsal room, a hallway, and a staircase scene could all take place in the same building. This will not only help you reduce your budget, but it also means you'll have less location changes on a given shoot day, which will save additional time, money, and stress. I fucking hate location changes. Once I started finding locations, we started location scouting. This is an important part of the process because you can start to really visualize the scenes once you know what the spaces they will take place in will look like.
Kind of reminds me of my house. What a dump.
I usually take my cinematographer with me or any other department heads that are available. We take a variety of pictures and also start thinking about practical issues like where we can draw electricity from, where we can store equipment, where we can load equipment from, and so on.
We're producing a film, as a matter of fact.
It would of course be nice to just focus on the creative aspects, but I was also producing the film, so I had to keep these things in mind.
I'm writing, producing, and directing it personally.
In some cases, I would also stand in for certain shots in roughly the positions the actors would be in so that we can see what the framing might look like. I then add these shots to the lookbook or the shot list so that the cast and crew can have an idea of what we're looking for. And that brings us right on to the next step, which is pre-vis or pre-visualization. This is when you start visually breaking down the film into how you'd like to capture it, which I've touched on in previous videos. Some prefer to improvise the shots and framing on set.
I do not use a storyboard. I think it's an instrument of the cowards.
But in order to ensure you get the results you want, I would highly recommend some amount of pre-vis. I hate being rushed on set, so I like to know that I've thought through all of the possibilities in pre-production so that I know what I require to maintain my original intention.
Let me think about it for a minute!
So I try to plan a shot list that'll realistically fit into the shooting schedule, and I like to know what I want to prioritize if we end up getting delayed. Essentially, I need to know which shots and scene elements are important for the edit. I would always recommend to plan your shots and your coverage with the edit in mind, which is usually referred to as shooting for the edit. Ideally, you're able to visualize the film in your head. It's easier to make decisions on set when you're thinking about how the shots will cut together later in the edit.
Seeing the big picture.
There are many different ways you can prepare your pre-vis: storyboards, floor plans, animatics, 3D renders. I've talked about storyboards before, but I don't think I've talked about floor plans.
Well, let's fucking get into it.
A floor plan is essentially a bird's eye view of your set or shooting location. From this view, you're able to see the position of the characters, the camera, set elements, lighting gear, whatever you decide to include. This is particularly useful for scenes with complicated blocking, which is how the characters move throughout the scene, but it's also useful for various departments to get a sense of the layout of the scene.
We need everyone on the same page.
The software I use to make floor plans is called Shot Designer. While the software is predominantly intended for the creation of floor plans, when you add cameras to the scene, it simultaneously generates a shot list for you.
Nice.
You can then add various details to the shot list like you would a standard shot list. So essentially, if you prepare your scenes and shots extensively in the software, you can export your floor plans and a shot list in one go, which saved me a lot of time.
There's never enough time, never enough.
I'm not sponsored by Shot Designer. It's also a little bit old school at this point, now that you've got people designing their scenes in 3D, but I sometimes use it and find it does the job.
If it ain't broke,
Don't fix it.
So based on the location scout, I would roughly design the layout of the scene. I use that layout to position the actors and the camera. I also try to make everything as clear as possible by including labels. All my departments will receive this document and use it on set, so it's important that they can quickly orient themselves and understand the layout.
What is this? What am I looking at here?
So for this short film, I sent the floor plans and shot lists to the department heads and scheduled meetings with them. As an example, in the meeting with the cinematographer and the gaffer, we went through the film concept and the scenes, just so we're all on the same page. I basically explained how I imagined the scenes and the shots. This lets them visualize the scenes, and then it's open for discussion. Suggestions, new ideas, alternatives. This part of the process is very open and more about thinking freely.
A free fire idea zone.
However, we also discuss practical aspects of the locations that are relevant for the departments. Electricity, access for equipment and crew, special location-specific considerations. And the meetings with other department heads are similar. I basically go through my ideas and how I imagined the relevant aspects of the scenes, and then we discuss how best to achieve this and what else might work. These are really important conversations to have well in advance of the shoot. That way you can really plan ahead and make sure you're working towards the same vision.
Remind me again why we're doing this?
It's important to make sure that you stay in touch with your department heads throughout pre-production if you want to avoid disasters or surprises on set. You might also share films that inspired you that are similar to the one you're making, or other references that might be relevant.
Check this shit out.
However you decide to work together is completely up to you and can be as dynamic and fluid as you want it to be. You'll likely have a different process with each collaborator on each project. That's part of what keeps it interesting.
Variety is the spice of life.
This covers some of the key stuff you might want to keep in mind during pre-production as a director, and I'll probably cover producers' pre-production stuff in the next video. Now get the fuck out of here and make your film.
Oh!